The moon smelled like old fire. That was the first thing Orin noticed when he stepped off the crawler and onto the cracked surface of Vdara. Not the silence, though, that came next. Not the black scorch lines carved across the stone like something enormous had dragged its claws through the rock. The smell hit him first, burnt air and deep mineral heat, the kind that lives inside stone for decades after something terrible happens to it. He had read the reports. Everyone in the research field had. Vdara was listed in the Sovereign Pact Geological Registry as thermally unstable, minimal biological interest, cleared for survey-class visitation. 12 words. 12 words for a world that had once been the nesting ground of the Dreesen, a species that could cross star systems on their own wings, think in colors and feelings, and bond with another mind so completely that the bond lasted until death. The Pact had cleared Vdara 16 years ago. Cleared was the word they used. Orin had learned not to push on what that word meant at Pact functions. He was here as part of the Ardent Reaches Mineral Survey. Captain Duvos had taken the contract because the pay was solid and the risk was listed as low. Dr. Fenara was leading the core sampling team on the Eastern Ridge. Orin had been handed the thermal vent zones, the deep cave systems that pocked the moon's southern face, because no one else wanted the cramped, hot, unremarkable work. He didn't mind. He was good at slow, careful work in small spaces. The vent systems were a kilometer of narrow tunnels and sudden drops. Orin mapped as he moved, tagging mineral formations and logging temperature readings into his datapad. His light swept pale yellow across the walls, nothing remarkable. Old stone, old heat. Then he found the door. It wasn't a door exactly. It was a seam in the rock, a perfect seam, the kind that did not happen naturally. The edges were slightly melted, fused from the inside. Something had sealed this passage deliberately from within. The stone around it was newer than the surrounding wall. Orin ran his scanner over it. The seal was roughly 9 years old. After the Pact's operation, someone had been here after. He spent 40 minutes carefully working the seam apart with his kit. When the rock face finally shifted, warm air breathed out at him, not the bitter thermal heat of the vents, but something softer, living warm. The cave on the other side was small, smooth walls, a nest of heat-conducting mineral dust shaped into a careful bowl at the center, and in the bowl, surrounded by the cracked remains of a single large egg, was a creature the size of a large dog. It had scales the color of a young forest, deep green shot through with gold. 2 small horns sat above its eyes, the left one cracked near the tip. Its wings were folded flat against its body, trembling slightly. Its eyes, when they opened, were the pale silver of a new coin. It looked at Orin. It made a sound that was not quite a growl and not quite a cry. Then it pressed itself into the far wall of the cave and spread its wings as wide as the space allowed, which wasn't wide at all, and it shook. Orin did not reach for it. He did not speak to it or make slow, careful sounds the way people do when they are trying to seem safe. He simply sat down on the cave floor, cross-legged, and turned off his helmet light, so the space was lit only by the faint bioglow of the mineral walls. Then he waited. 7 minutes passed. The creature watched him the entire time, wings still spread, chest heaving. Orin did not move. He breathed slowly and looked at the ground between them, not at the creature's eyes. On the 8th minute, the wings folded. On the 12th, the creature took 1 step forward. On the 15th, it pressed its snout against Orin's hand. The touch lasted only a second, but in that second, something passed through the contact, a feeling without words, warmth, a long, exhausting confusion, and underneath both of those, something so heavy it had no name, the kind of alone that happens when everything you came from is gone. Orin sat with that feeling for a moment. Then he turned his hand over slowly, palm up, and held it still. The creature stepped fully forward and sat in his open hand like it had decided something. On his datapad, Orin changed his survey log entry from Thermal Vent Cluster 7 to Mineral Deposit, Class 4, Inert. He flagged it low priority. Then he unzipped his jacket, tucked the creature against his chest, and zipped it back up. Getting back to the Ardent Reach took 2 hours. The whole way, the creature did not make a sound. It kept one small claw hooked through the fabric of his shirt, just lightly, the way something does when it isn't sure if it's allowed to hold on but can't quite let go either. Orin kept one hand pressed over it the whole walk back, not to hide it, to tell it, without words, that it was warm and it was not falling and he was not going anywhere. He didn't know yet what he had started. He only knew that whatever had sealed that cave 9 years ago had done it carefully and with hope, and he was not going to be the one who made that hope wrong. He carried her aboard. He told no one. Her name came later. She gave it to him herself in her own way. For now she was just alive, the last of everything she was, pressed against a human heart that had decided, without needing a reason, that this mattered. 3 days into the return route, she started sending pictures. Not real pictures, nothing Orin could point at and show someone. They arrived behind his eyes, sudden, small, like a word you suddenly remember while doing something else. He would be reviewing his survey notes, and then, for a half-second, he would see the nest, the egg, the dark, a feeling attached to the image like a label, waiting, waiting, waiting. He sat down on his cot and looked at her. She was awake, watching him from the corner of the storage bay where he'd built her a space out of heat foam padding and an old equipment crate. She had grown in 3 days, not dramatically, but the golden lines in her scales were brighter and she held her head with less shake in it. He sent something back deliberately. He wasn't sure if he was doing it right, but he thought of the ship, the hum of its engines, the smell of recycled air, and tried to attach a feeling to it. Safe, moving, together. She blinked, then she walked over and settled against his leg. He exhaled. He named her solely on the 4th day. He didn't plan it. He was writing in his personal log and wrote her name before he had decided on one, and when he read it back, it felt true, so he kept it. On the 5th day, Riva found them. Riva was a young Qurani deckhand, pale blue-gray skin, 4 arms, quiet in the way people are quiet when they are always thinking ahead. She came to Orin's storage bay looking for a spare coupling tool and used her override card because she assumed the bay was empty. She opened the door and saw Soli. Soli saw her. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Riva made a sound, not a scream, more a short, sharp intake of breath, and took a step back. Soli spread her wings and went very still, like a creature that had learned stillness was its best defense. But then something happened. Riva stopped backing away. Her expression shifted, not to calm exactly, but to a kind of confused suspension. Her 4 hands lowered slowly. She pressed 2 fingers to her temple, blinking. Soli had sent her something. Orin saw it happen. He recognized the look. He'd worn that look himself on the cave floor on Vdara. What was that? Riva said. It was not really a question. She already knew what it was. She does that, Orin said. She sends feelings, sometimes images. She showed me a nest, Riva said quietly. Warm, safe. She looked at Soli for a long moment. She was telling me she wasn't dangerous. Yes, Orin said. Riva was silent for a long time. Then she looked at him. Does the captain know? No. Dr. Fenara. No. Another long silence. Soli watched Riva with her pale silver eyes and did not move. There is a packed checkpoint at Myeth Lane, Riva said finally. Customs sweep, full bioscans. I know, Orin said. I've been building a thermal shield. It masks her biosignature under the heat profile of the engine cooling units. Riva looked at the nest setup, the equipment crate, the careful insulation. She looked at Orin. You planned this before you even got back to the ship. I decided in the cave, he said. Everything after that was just logistics. Riva looked back at Soli for a long time. Then Soli did something she had not done before. She walked over to a small mechanical puzzle, a locking cube Orin had left on the floor to give her something to do, and in 30 seconds, without pausing, she took it apart and put it back together in the correct sequence. Riva stared. She did that on the 2nd day, Orin said. Took her about 3 minutes the first time. Riva crouched down slowly. Soli looked at her. Then Soli walked over and pressed her snout briefly against Riva's lower hand, the small one, the fine work hand that Qurani used for delicate tasks. A small pulse of warmth, a hello. I won't say anything, Riva said. She straightened up. I want to help. They hit the Mayath checkpoint 2 days later. The packed customs vessel was a mid-class scanner ship, thorough, procedural, and entirely without imagination. Officer Bilan led the boarding team. He was tall, careful, and the kind of professional who checked everything twice. He checked everything twice. Soli lay completely still inside the thermal casing Orin and Riva had built together over 2 late nights, her wings flat, her glow suppressed, her breathing shallow. Bilan paused outside the storage bay door for 11 seconds. Orin counted. He stood next to the officer and kept his face doing nothing. Mineral samples, Bilan said. From Vdara's southern vent system, Orin said. Class 4 inert, all logged. Bilan looked at him, then at the door, then he moved on. That night, after the checkpoint cleared and the packed vessel dropped away into the dark, Orin sat in the storage bay and let out a breath that felt like it had been living in his chest for 2 days. Soli climbed into his lap and tucked her head under his chin. He didn't move her. A packed news broadcast ran quietly on his datapad. An official named Ambassador Droll, standing at a podium somewhere gleaming and far away, announced that the Dreesen species was officially archived, confirmed extinct, case closed. His tone was the tone of someone reading an inventory update. Orin turned it off. Soli had heard it too. She pressed a little tighter against his chest. She sent him one image, the dark of the cave, and then, over it, like a light turning on, his footsteps approaching through the tunnel. He understood what she was saying. He put his hand over her back, steady and warm. I know, he said quietly, I know. Outside, the stars moved. Hearth Station had the kind of look that said it had been repaired so many times it no longer remembered its original shape. Panels of 3 different metals, corridors that turned at angles nobody had planned, a central hall where the lighting was too warm and the benches were bolted down at odd heights because the people who lived here came in too many sizes to agree on a standard. Orin liked it immediately. Captain Duvos had agreed to the unplanned stop without much argument, which told Orin that Duvos knew more than he had said. The captain had looked at him for a long moment in the corridor outside the bridge and said only, 2 days, don't cause problems I have to explain. Then he had walked away without asking any questions, which was, Orin had come to understand, the Qurani version of kindness. Hearth Station existed at the edge of where packed patrol routes bothered to reach. The people here were human miners, Tharak traders, a few retired researchers, and the kind of small community that forms when people choose somewhere remote on purpose. They were not easily startled. They were, however, surprised by Soli. She had grown again. Her head now reached Orin's hip. Her wingspan, when she stretched it fully in Hearth's main corridor, made 2 miners step back, and one of them say something in a language Orin didn't know but understood by tone. The station's children had no such hesitation. Len was 11 years old, small for her age, with the particular confidence of someone who had grown up in a place where there were no other children to compare herself to. She walked up to Soli on the first day, looked her directly in the eye and said, "Can you understand me?" Soli looked at her, then sent a feeling, yes. Len felt it. Her eyes went wide, not with fear, with delight. "Do that again," she said immediately. They were friends within the hour. The elder who changed everything was Ren. He was 70-something and had once been a packed academic, a linguist, specifically one who had spent decades cataloging the communication systems of non-human species before the Pact's cultural consolidation programs had made that kind of work uncomfortable to do openly. He had retired to Hearth Station and spent his days writing a dictionary nobody had asked for, because he believed language was worth recording even if no one was listening yet. When he met Soli, he sat down across from her at a table in the common room and folded his hands and said, in a slow and careful voice, I suspect you understand more than you can say. I would like to help with the second part, if you'll let me. Soli looked at him for a moment. Then she sent him an image, a mouth opening and closing with sound lines coming out, and underneath it a question mark, not literally, but the feeling of one. How? Ren smiled. Exactly, he said. We'll start with sounds. He was with her 4 hours every day after that. He brought no equipment, no recording devices, nothing the Pact could have called data. Just himself, a notebook, and patience. He would make a sound, she would try to replicate it, and when she got it right, really right, not approximate, Ren would nod once in a very serious way that Soli quickly understood meant she had done something real. Within 2 weeks, she was combining sounds into short sequences. Within 3, she spoke her first full sentence. She looked at Orin across the common room table and said, in a voice that was rough at the edges but clear at the center, "You came back." The room went quiet. Orin looked at her. He thought about the cave. He thought about the way she had pressed her snout to his hand in the dark, in a place that smelled like the end of everything she had ever had. "Yes," he said. "You will come back," she said. It was not a question, but it was asking something. "Yes," he said again. She sat with that for a moment, then she went back to her lesson with Ren. The Tharak trader called Gore witnessed this exchange. Gore was vast, nearly 3 meters of stone-gray skin and slow, deliberate movement. He spoke rarely, and when he did, other people tended to listen. He had been watching Soli for several days with the focused attention of someone taking careful notes in their head. That evening, he found Orin in the station's small supply corridor. "She is not what I expected," Gore said. "What did you expect?" Orin asked. Gore considered this. "Something broken," he said, "something that had forgotten itself." Orin looked toward the common room where Soli was playing a stacking game with Len, failing deliberately so that Len could win, which both of them found very funny. "She remembered herself," Orin said. "She just needed somewhere to do it." Gore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There are others who would want to know something survived, good others, not packed." Orin looked at him. "I will say nothing specific," Gore said. "I will say only, something worth protecting exists. That is enough for the people I know." Orin thought about that, about the bounty that was still active, about Bilan pausing outside the storage bay door for 11 seconds. "Be careful," he said. "Always," Gore said. Then, 2 days before the Ardent Reach was scheduled to leave, Soli asked the question Orin had been carrying since the cave. She found him sitting alone in the outer corridor where the viewport looked out at open space. She sat beside him, her shoulder pressed to his arm. She looked at the stars for a while. Then she said, "Are there others like me?" The stars were very still. Orin told her the truth. He said it simply and without softening it, because she deserved the real shape of things. She was quiet for a long time after, long enough that Len came looking for her and then quietly left when she saw the two of them sitting together in the corridor. Finally, Soli said, "Were they afraid when they died?" Orin sat with the question. He could feel her waiting, not impatiently, but fully, the way she did everything. "I don't know," he said, "but you are not going to die." She turned and looked at him. "You are sure?" she said. Not a question, something else, something that needed him to understand what she was actually asking. "I am sure," he said, "that I will do everything I can." She looked at him for another moment. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder, heavy and warm. Outside, a packed scanner vessel moved across the edge of the sector, its sweep lights quiet and slow, looking for something it didn't know was already beyond its reach. The Ironfold docked at Hearth Station on a Tuesday, which was an ordinary day right up until it wasn't. Orin was in the corridor outside Ren's room when the docking alarm sounded, not the emergency tone, just the soft arrival chime, the one that meant a registered vessel was coupling to the outer ring. He checked the station's public manifest on the nearest wall panel. The Ironfold was listed as a licensed contractor vessel. No flags, no listed cargo. Reva found him 30 seconds later. She had already seen the hull markings. Bounty crew, she said quietly. Her four hands were very still, which was how he knew she was working hard not to show anything in her face. Pack contracted. Commander Seth's outfit. They're good at what they do. Orin thought of Soli, who was at that moment in the common room learning card sequences from Len. Get Len, he said. Take Soli to the deep mine access on sublevel 3. The shaft Gore showed us. Stay there. Don't send any pulses, nothing psychic, nothing electronic. Reva was already moving. Commander Seth was a lean Qurani with the manner of someone who had stopped being impressed by things a very long time ago. He presented the extraction warrant to the Hearth Council in the main hall without drama, reading the relevant clauses in a flat voice as though he were describing the weather. The warrant was for all Dreesen biological material, living or otherwise. It named Vdara survey data as the triggering evidence. It was entirely legal under Sovereign Pact jurisdiction, which technically extended to Hearth Station by a treaty most of the station's residents had never read and none of them had signed. The Hearth Council, 3 humans and 2 Tharak, stalled. They asked for the warrant to be verified through the conclave registry, which would take time. Seth agreed pleasantly because he was already deploying his search team through the station's secondary corridors. Orin was found in his quarters 10 minutes later. 2 of Seth's crew walked him to the main hall. No restraints, just presence. Seth sat across from him at the long table and folded his hands. You were on Vdara, Seth said. It was not a question, it was a starting point. Mineral survey, Orin said. I filed the full report. You did, Seth agreed. Very thoroughly, very boring report. He paused. Most researchers get nervous when I talk to them. They talk too much or go very quiet. You're doing something different. Orin waited. You're calm, Seth said. Not the calm of someone who has nothing to hide. The calm of someone who isn't worried about whether I find it. I'm a patient person, Orin said. No, Seth said. Patient people worry. They just wait quietly while they do it. He studied Orin. Whatever you're protecting, it can protect itself. That's why you're calm. Orin said nothing. In sublevel 3, the search team found the shaft access door. They found Len sitting in front of it, which made one of them pause because nobody wants to move a child. They found Reva behind Len, arms crossed, all 4 of them. They did not find Soli. Soli had gone deeper into the shaft system when she felt the ship arrive. Not because Orin told her to, he hadn't had time. She felt the shape of the situation through the station's walls, the way she felt temperature and vibration, and the particular weight of people moving with purpose. She had gone deeper on her own, following a passage that curved downward into the thermal rock. She emerged from a completely different tunnel, on the far side of the station's main structure, 30 meters behind Seth's search team. She stood in the entrance of the main hall. She had grown again. Nobody had noticed until now, because growth is incremental when you're watching it happen. But from across the hall, with her wings beginning to open and the bioluminescent lines along her spine beginning to glow, what walked into that space was not a dog-sized curiosity anymore. What walked in was something that had decided it was done hiding. Seth turned. The search team turned. Seth's hand moved toward his side arm out of pure reflex. Then it stopped, because Soli was not moving toward anyone. She walked to the center of the hall, in the open space between the tables, and she sat down. She spread her wings to their full span, which filled the hall from side to side, and she lifted her head, and she spoke. I am Soli, she said, in her rough-edged voice that had gotten cleaner over weeks of lessons. I am the last, and I am not property. The hall went completely silent. Nobody moved. Marit was Seth's second, a former Pact soldier with a face that had learned not to show much. She stood to Seth's left with her weapon half raised. She was looking at Soli. Her weapon came down slowly, without her seeming to decide to lower it. It just descended. Soli looked at Marit. She sent something small, careful, not a flood of feeling but a single image. A cave, sealed from inside. a very long wait. Marit looked like someone who had just been told something they had already known for years, but not allowed themselves to think about. She set her weapon on the table. Seth stood very still. He was looking at Soli with the expression of a professional whose contract had just become significantly more complicated. He looked at Orin, then back at Soli. "She spoke," he said quietly. "She does that," Orin said. Seth was quiet for a long moment. The Hearth Council was quiet. The search team was quiet. Len, who had come up from the shaft with Reva, was watching from the doorway with her arms crossed and a look on her face that said she had always known it would come to this. Soli held the center of the hall and did not move and did not blink. She was not threatening anyone. She did not need to. She had simply stopped being invisible. The galaxy could figure out the rest. The conclave ring was built to make people feel small. That was not its stated purpose. Its stated purpose was neutral diplomatic assembly, but the people who designed it had understood that species who felt small were less likely to start arguments. The ceilings were high. The corridors were wide. The main assembly chamber could seat 400 delegates and still leave enough open space above them that sound had room to wander before it settled. Gore's network had gotten them an emergency session slot. Gore himself said only that it had taken 6 favors and 1 very long conversation with a Selvari communications officer who owed him money. He did not elaborate. They came in under protection flag arranged through the Conclave Observer Corps. It was fragile protection, the kind that existed because enough parties wanted the appearance of neutrality, not because anyone would actually stop the pact from doing what it wanted. But it was enough to get through the door. Marit had arranged that part. She had defected quietly, without announcement, 2 days after the confrontation in Hearth Station's main hall. She had sent Seth a single message that said she was exercising her discretion clause and walked to the Conclave Observer intake without looking back. Seth had not followed. Orin suspected Seth had not been surprised. High Auditor rank represented the Sovereign Pact. He was a tall Qurani in formal grey with the manner of someone who had never once worried that the room was not on his side. He presented the Pact's position in the first 10 minutes. The Dreesen Extinction and Asset Reclamation Protocol was legally binding, predated the current Conclave Charter by 4 years, and superseded any protection flag issued under observer status. He called Soli a reclaimed biological asset, with the specific neutrality of someone who has decided that language is a tool rather than a truth. Nobody interrupted him. He was technically correct about most of it. Orin was given the floor next. He stood at the speaker's position in the center of the chamber. 400 delegates looked down at him. He was not a diplomat. He was not an orator. He had prepared nothing, and when Ren had offered to write him something, he had said no. He took out his datapad. He read the survey numbers from Vdara, the biological assessment data he had compiled over 3 months aboard the Ardent Reach, growth rates, cognitive response benchmarks, language acquisition curves that no animal produced, only persons. He read the psychic bonding data, the structure of the transmissions, the complexity, the specificity, the fact that Soli had communicated grief, memory, patience, and humor, and that she had done all of this intentionally, selectively, and with clear understanding of her audience. He read the Pact's own efficiency reports from the Vdara operation, the scale harvest quotas, the procurement invoices, the mass grave coordinates filed under biological material disposal. He read them in the same flat voice the documents used, because that voice was the most damning thing about them. Then he looked up. "We did not find a creature," he said. "We found a survivor, and every civilization in this room knows what it means to be the last one." He sat down. The chamber was quiet. Then Soli moved to the center. She had been sitting at the edge of the speaker's space, still and waiting. Now she stood. Her wingspan, when she opened it fully, reached from one side of the speaker's circle to the other. The bioluminescent lines on her spine lit up, not aggressively, not a display of threat, but the way a light turns on in a room when someone wants to be seen clearly. She did not speak at first. She sent. The pulse went wide and open, broader than anything she had done before. Orin felt it from his seat. Everyone in the chamber felt it. 400 delegates of a dozen species, all of them stopped mid-breath at the same moment. What they received was not Soli's own memory. It was older, inherited, stored in the psychic core she had been born with, passed down through generations of Dreesen the way some species pass down stories. The last hours of Vdara, not as data, as experience, the heat, the confusion, the sound of things ending, the specific silence that comes after. And then, over that silence, a different memory, small and warm and very recent. A cave, a dark cave, smelling of old fire and deep mineral heat, a footstep in the tunnel, a shape in the entrance, sitting down on the floor, turning off its light. Waiting. Not waiting for the creature to come to it, just waiting, being present without demand, staying. The pulse ended. The chamber was very quiet. Delegate Yos of the Qurani dissenter bloc had not spoken publicly against the pact in 11 years. He stood up now. He did not look at Renk. He looked at the center of the floor where Soli stood, wings still open, spine still glowing softly. I call for an immediate jurisdictional vote, he said. His voice was steady. On the grounds that the subject of this warrant has demonstrated clear personhood by any reasonable standard held by any member of this conclave. Renk stood, the protocol. The protocol was written before she spoke, Yos said. Update the protocol. The vote ran in 14 minutes. In a chamber that moved slowly on a good day, 14 minutes was close to instantaneous. The count came in across the display board at the chamber's front wall. 14 in favor of withdrawing pact jurisdiction, 3 against. Renk stood very still for a moment. Then he gathered his materials and left the chamber without speaking, because there was nothing left to say that the numbers hadn't already said more efficiently. Soli folded her wings. She turned and found Orin in the seats. She sent him one thing, simple, quick, without ceremony. Warmth, the same warmth from the cave, the first thing she had ever sent him. He pressed his hand to his chest, where she had pressed her snout in the dark on Vdara, and he nodded. In the seats around him, Ren was writing in his notebook. Reva had her eyes closed. Len, who should not technically have been in the chamber but had gotten in anyway, was sitting 3 rows back with her arms wrapped around her knees and her face doing something complicated. Gore was standing at the back of the chamber. When Orin looked at him, the Tharak gave a single, slow nod. Outside the conclave ring, the news was already moving. 14-3 was not a number that stayed quiet. The galaxy was paying attention now, whether it wanted to or not. 1 year was not enough time to fix anything. Orin knew that. He had never expected it to be. The Sovereign Pact had not collapsed. It had fractured, 3 member species suspending their charters, 2 others calling for independent reviews of the Extinction Protocol, the whole structure developing cracks the way old stone does, slowly and then all at once in places nobody was watching. The war crime prosecution was moving through the conclave's legal process at the pace of a cold tide. It would take years, possibly decades. But things were different now, in the way that certain things, once said, cannot be unsaid. The galaxy knew Soli's name. Orin found that out the first time he was recognized in a spaceport by a Selvari biologist who grabbed his arm and asked, with the intensity of someone who had been waiting a long time to ask something, whether Soli was really as intelligent as the broadcast testimony had suggested. He said yes. The Selvari stared at him and then said, very quietly, "We have a cryo-archive we've been afraid to open, from a pact decommission. We found it 3 years ago, and we didn't know what to do with it." "What's in it?" Orin asked. "Genetic material," the Selvari said. "We think Dreesen, we weren't certain enough to say anything before, but now." Orin forwarded the message to Soli before he even left the spaceport. Soli was on Arvel by then. The Conclave had established a Dreesen cultural preservation zone on a temperate moon, not a zoo, not a sanctuary in the diminishing sense, but a legal territory with full personhood protections, administered jointly by a board that included Soli herself and, at her specific request, Ren and Len. Reva had left the Ardent Reach to work there full-time, running the archive documentation project. Gore visited regularly and sat with Soli for long hours without speaking, which both of them seemed to find productive. Ren was finishing the Dreesen language dictionary. Soli contributed to it every day. It was now 412 pages and growing, because Soli kept remembering things, not just words, but structures, concepts, ways of meaning that required 3 human words to approximate 1 Dreesen one. Ren wrote all of it down in his small, careful handwriting and said regularly that he hoped he lived long enough to finish it, and Soli sent him a feeling of certainty every time he said it that he chose to believe. Len, now 13, was writing letters to Soli on a dedicated comms channel. Long letters. They discussed everything: books, unfair rules, the particular difficulty of being young in a world that kept making decisions without asking you. Soli's replies were detailed and direct, and occasionally very funny, and Len kept every one of them in a file she was already thinking of as something she might show people someday. Marit had joined the Conclave Observer Corps officially. She ran the enforcement monitoring desk for the Vdara region, which meant she was the first person the Pact had to call when they wanted to do anything within 10 sectors of where this had all started. She was very thorough. Commander Seth had retired his warrant publicly and moved on to a different contract without comment. He was not a changed man. He was a professional who had encountered something outside the edges of his professional assumptions and had chosen, with minimal drama, to move to a different set of edges. Orin had no particular feeling about this. Some people turned because they were moved. Some people turned because the ground beneath them shifted. Both kinds of turning looked the same from where you were standing. On a Thursday morning, Orin was sitting on the outer platform of Arvel's research station when Soli's message arrived. Not a comms message. A pulse, across a distance she had never managed before, clear and detailed and warm, reaching him through the hull of the station and the atmosphere of the moon. The image she sent was of a horizon, stars, open space, and then her own claw tracing letters in the dust of Arvel's surface. The letters said, "Go look." He smiled. He started booking passage before he finished his tea. He didn't know what the Selvari archive held. He didn't know if the genetic material was recoverable or what recovery would even mean without a living population to rebuild from. He knew those questions were for people who understood things he didn't. What he understood was cave floors and thermal shielding and the particular patience of sitting in a dark place and waiting to see what was alive in it. That evening, in the open territory above Arvel's southern plains, Soli flew. Not a test flight or an exercise, not a circuit around the station. She went up and kept going, up through the cloud layer, up through the thin upper atmosphere, up into the space between the moon and its parent planet, where the solar radiation came in clean and constant, and her wings could catch it the way old sailing ships caught ocean wind. She was vast up there. Her wingspan measured 6 meters now, and it was still growing. The golden green of her scales was deeper than it had been in the cave, richer, the color of something fully alive in good conditions. The bioluminescent lines ran bright along her spine and the undersides of her wings, and she moved through the dark with the ease of something that had always been meant for it. She was not the last in the way that word had once meant. She was not the only. She was the first of what might come next, if enough careful people looked in enough cold archives and enough xenobiologists booked passage toward uncertain things. Below her, on 100 worlds, beings of a dozen species were asking the same question for the first time. What else did we lose before we knew to look? And on a dozen human stations, in storage bays and research corridors and small warm rooms with bad lighting, humans were already pulling up star maps, already packing equipment, already asking for directions to the places nobody official had thought worth checking. Because that question, that specific question, was one they had never once been able to leave alone. Not out of guilt, not out of policy, not because someone told them to. just because something might still be alive in the dark, and alive things mattered. And if you sat still long enough and turned off your light and waited without demanding anything in return, sometimes something pressed its nose against your hand. And that was enough. That had always been enough. The galaxy was learning why.